Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Panachecast. This is Panache Software's weekly podcast, going through all the latest legal tech news. I say weekly. We've missed a couple of weeks here and there so far, but the
small print doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. No, I don't think people are holding us to that, so we'll ignore that. But episode 11, and this week we're going to be talking about AI or Excel on steroids, the ethics of AI as a tool. 9 technology procurement tips for corporate legal teams, and PwC unveils the first cohort of scale-ups in their LawTech program. But before we get into any of that, I'd like to welcome my co-host, as always, Neil Pemberton.
Thank you. Good to be back. Before we get into the news articles which you just mentioned, I want to address a question that I had asked of me recently by a colleague whose name I won't repeat. But she said to me, when are you going to be filming your next episode of Fun with Flags? And I think that was meant to be a derogatory statement about...
She's making some comment on our expert podcasting and presenting skills?
But I'm assuming that everybody watching and listening, and there are obviously thousands of groupies now that we have, knows what Fun with Flags is. Or anyone who doesn't, there's that Big Bang Theory show where one of the characters, who's meant to be quite a dull character, is doing his own... podcast.
Are you commenting
series.
On us being dull characters?
Not at all.
No,
I mean,
that's okay.
People are tuning in for this. Yes, sure you can imagine. Anyway, so it got me to thinking that we probably ought to have our own flag. So, without further ado, let me just introduce phase 1 of the Fun with Flags Panachecast flag.
Panache Software flag.
Yeah. Now that's not corporate color, official corporate color, so the marketing team is going to scold me for that, but it's just a prototype.
I can see that it took a lot of the marketing budget as well to put that one together.
It did. I mean, don't underestimate the quality.
Yes.
You can't just put this together in 5 minutes. That's a lot of effort.
I should think it took slightly less than 5 minutes, but
that's what I mean. You can't put it together in 5 minutes. But anyway, that's we'll come back with some more versions of that. I think this is important, as we all know. But branding is obviously number one on the list.
Critical to
awareness of the Panache Software brand. So there is Fun with Flags for the person who was taking the you know what out of this show. Anyway, item number 2 before we get started. On a more serious note. Listening back to the last show, episode 10, we mentioned in there blockchain and whether that could be the future of the property market, and that was an article that was produced by the Land Registry, and we chatted about property transactions generally, but we didn't actually really go into that much detail on blockchain, the technology behind it, how it, notwithstanding the technology, what it actually is and what it does and how it works. So we probably ought to do that, and we will. We'll make an effort and a point of having a show. Maybe that can be a Panachecast extra or something. The blockchain technology and how it works and what to do.
I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, saying we should do a quick introduction or something to demystify. And in the same way we tried to do the show the other way to sort of demystify chatbots and show how easy it is to use some of these cognitive services and something like that. Then I think it's a good topic just to. Not necessarily delve deep into the technology behind it and how that actually functions, although that is an interesting facet of it. But also just to discuss how these things can be used and how they are being used and whether they are suitable for some of the things that people talk about, which isn't always the case. There is a lot of headlines about it, that it can be used for lots of stuff that it can't. So.
Well, we'll get a couple of case studies, hopefully, and then hopefully the Land Registry, we can get a bit more information about that if we are due to speak to them in the near future. Hopefully we can cover that off. And as you say, bust some of the myths about blockchain.
Yeah, sounds good.
But yes, ultimately what we want to hear is feedback, as usual. People, if you can get in touch with us, patreon.com/Panache Software is probably the best way. We want to hear your feedback, your thoughts on the show, more ideas about things like Fun with Flags, comments
or better designs, comments on the branding and stuff.
Exactly. And the Patreon page is there. That's where all the material is hosted, and it's really for us to try and gather some support for the show. And if you'd like to go along and have a look at that, that would be wonderful. Patreon, patreon.com/Panache patreon.com/Panache Software, where you can find information about levels of membership and so on. And we haven't got a production line of flags yet, so I can't send any of those out. But the T-shirts are ready to go for anyone that wants one. Just go along and have a look at the membership levels.
But I mean, the more supporters means, I guess, the more flags and the quality will just skyrocket. So,
you can't get much better than that.
No, I know. It's going to be difficult, but maybe we'll manage it.
We might be able to manage it.
Sort it out.
Okay, so let's go on to item number 1. Which is an article that we found from Legal IT Insider. As Pete said, the title is AI or Excel on steroids, and we've come across that topic and theme before. The ethics of AI as a tool and its future regulation. So there's a couple of bits from this article which we thought it probably just worth reading out. So I'll read the first paragraph. From a technological perspective, AI is simply a series of computing techniques that are designed to mimic human behavior. In that sense, AI has been around since the 1950s. Bristow's IT partner Chris Holder told delegates at the 2019 Legal Leaders Glen Legal IT Forum. He comments, "I would question whether what many CIOs are currently purchasing is true AI, or whether it is actually just Excel on steroids." That's a common phrase, isn't it? Things on steroids is, souped up version. You hear that a lot.
Yeah.
He said, in a wide-ranging and thoughtful talk on how AI is currently being used, how that will change, and what that means in terms of meaningful regulation and ethics. And then he refers to the do not pay idea and the software behind that. And again, just a quote from him. He says, "The press reported the story as the arrival of robot lawyers. But when you actually analysed it, this was just a decision tree. This wasn't machine making the decisions on its own." And I thought that was an interesting comment, quite insightful. That is that a good way of drawing a distinction between what people might see as AI, but actually isn't. The idea of that. It was a chatbot, really, wasn't it? The do not pay.
Yeah.
It's a series of questions put into a machine with some answers pre-populated, and it spits out an answer for you, but it isn't really making a judgment call on anything in the sense that you might think if you're thinking of a robot lawyer.
Yeah, I think it's related to how we, how you look at AI yourself, how you're terming that AI. I mean, most of the software at the moment out there, things like this do not pay, these would be classed in as things like analytical AI, which goes into the same kind of things that, like we talked last time about the chatbots and things, where you use the cognitive services. So thereby they are intelligent in that, they are decision-making machines, but those decisions are based on learning from previous experience.
Yeah.
So in this situation with this chatbot and this do not play, that previous experience is basically the flowchart building up of in these situations these rules apply. You've given the rules to the machine basically, and it will follow that through and give you the answer at the end of that. So based on your inputs, it will decide whether that was a valid parking ticket or it wasn't, based on very specific rules. Now, if you're thinking of AI as something like HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey and things like that, some super intelligent machine which has human thinking and can do lots of things for you, we're a long way from that kind of thing in any situation with regards to AI. So I think it's that misinterpretation of assuming that if you buy an AI solution, it can do everything for you and it understands concepts. As we talked about last time, these AI solutions need training in things. They don't work until you give them the information which they can make the decisions on. I wonder how far we are away from that. I mean, you remember that what's the phrase? You put 1,000 monkeys in a room typing on 1,000 typewriters, eventually you'll get a masterpiece. If you put 1,000... I think it might have been more than 1,000 monkeys, but...
a million monkeys.
Maybe an infinite number of monkeys, I think. But
how many software coder monkeys do we need to put in a room before we get a pure AI solution for how many years?
Probably quite a lot. Although I'm not sure I like being termed a coder monkey, but
sorry, I retract my previous thing.
But no, I mean, it's a valid thing. I mean, we're a long way from those things, and to be fair, in that kind of industry and stuff, most people aren't working on those kind of AI solutions. But I think you have to look at what you term as AI and how you're going to look at these solutions. I mean, you might consider, is your sat nav in your car an AI solution? You know, you can say, I want to go from here to here.
Yeah.
And it will calculate your route.
Yeah.
But again, it's doing that based on knowledge.
Yeah, that's interesting. And but go back to that, the do not pay thing. I mean, if you script out a series of things that says whether or not it's a legitimate parking ticket, you might say, well, were you parked on, for example, double yellow lines? And if it's a yes or a no, if it's a no, then it's not a parking ticket. Or were you parked in a zone where you shouldn't have been parked and you needed a permit? And there are a lot, but a finite number of questions that you could ask that would point you at a yes or no legitimate thing. But if you start then to venture into the realms of, well, is this fair or not fair? And you start to apply more of a human judgment to things, that's much harder, isn't it? I mean,
and that's the kind of thing that it wouldn't be doing.
No, exactly. And I think if we go back to what some of the stuff that's come out of this article, it says it's a tool. AI is a tool. AI functionality is used to help lawyers provide advice, but not to actually provide the advice itself, i.e. the advice is still coming from the lawyer, i.e. the person who can make a judgment on fairness or right and wrong, versus the machine which can extract, analyze the data, etc., and put it to you in a neat way. But it isn't ever going to make I don't think ever going to make a judgment, at least not in my lifetime, on what's fair and what's right.
And that would go for the same in, we've talked previously about things like, and I think last week we were talking about Raven and systems like that, which scan through documents to look for specific bits of information or how the documents are weighted for each party and things like that. Again, the AI isn't really making a decision on that. It's not making a judgment on that. It's taking its knowledge of how often these terms are used and what terms it should be flagging as being an issue. And it's taking all of that knowledge and saying, well, this phrase fits that criteria and things. It's not actually making a judgment on that itself. It's just looking at the data. And
I suspect it never could, because it would have to be taught how to make a judgment by people, right? And people will have differences of opinion. Different firms will have different approaches to things. I might look at one thing one day and say, on a fairness scale, it's 50% one day, and the next day maybe I'll say, well, actually, it's more like 40-60, because I've heard somebody else's point of view. It can never be done, I don't think, by machines. No,
and I think those kind of things are certainly beyond our reach at the moment. But I think what these tools can be used for is to speed up these processes and to focus in where people need to look. So things like the Raven solution and stuff, they're not expecting, I wouldn't imagine, when they're looking through millions of documents to find things regarding fraud and stuff like that. What they're doing primarily is weeding out those ones that you don't need to worry about very quickly, and allowing you then to focus on the ones that do need judgment on. So they're saying the tool believes with a certain amount of certainty that this particular document will be an issue. So then it's up to the actual lawyer to look through those things. But it means that lawyer hasn't had to look through several thousand other documents and just disregard them. That's been done through the AI. So it's definitely a case of, interpret how you think an AI should be running. If you're thinking it's an intelligent machine, maybe look at it differently and look at, rather than sort of artificial intelligence, look at it as kind of an automated intelligence. They're saying the press reported the story of the Don't Pay app as the arrival of robot lawyers. Well, what do you mean by a robot? There's lots of robots used in the manufacturing industry. You wouldn't assume that they're intelligent, but they go through a certain amount of steps that they've been pre-programmed to do, and this was doing the same. So in that case, it's coming out with an answer of, yes, you probably can contest this ticket, but that's then onto your judgment as to whether you do that and whether you then need legal representation to actually push that through in court.
So it's a misused term, I think, is what we're saying ultimately, and maybe the answer is yes, it's actually more like Excel or Word on steroids rather than a pure AI solution.
And I think it's interesting you say a misused term, and I think that is key. We've talked about it, I think, in one of the early episodes of startups and stuff struggling to get funding unless they're classing their product as an AI solution. So you're almost backing people into the corner to say, well, you're not AI, so we're not going to invest any money in you. So people will brand themselves an AI because they know that gets the headlines, even though their technology wouldn't strictly be classed as it. But these things change. We had the discussion earlier, things like optical character recognition were previously deemed AI solutions. They're so commonplace now and are so routine within systems that that's no longer classed as an AI solution. Whereas now things like natural language processing and speech recognition, those are now classed as AI solutions. But a final point that they made on here was relating to they picked out a report from the Law Society, and they're talking about, the Law Society, for example, is also considering whether machines will need to be regulated in the way that law firms and individual lawyers are, or whether firms and individuals will be held responsible for the actions of those machines. And I think that's an interesting to look into as well.
Rather than me try and unpick that, that conundrum. I mean, it'd be them and possibly the SRA that look into that. But as things stand at the moment, it's individual firms and the individuals at those firms that are investigated and regulated. Yes, if you've got this sort of idea of a corporate veil, and if you do things right correctly yourself as an individual, then the corporation that you're working for is the one that takes the liability. That assumes, of course, that you follow the rules internally. But as to where this fits and how, when one is using an AI or any other technology for that matter, and it goes wrong, how does that work? That is a difficult one. And of course, that may involve more than just one solution, because you might have a multitude of things working collaboratively. You might have other sides of firms, other firms' solutions integrating with your own. And I mean, it seems like a hornet's nest of and we've mentioned it before. There's things like blockchain now, and where we talk about smart contracts within blockchains, where these contracts are almost self-negotiating, where there is no input from a legal team or a lawyer in those situations. You could. We talked about blockchain going into things like land registry and areas like that. When these things are negotiated without any involvement from a person, who is responsible when it goes wrong? And that, I feel, ultimately, I think it's going to land in, the lawyer's responsibility. I think it will,
But it's going to be an interesting thing to look at, and it's going to be a bit of a minefield, I feel, to unpick some of this.
I'd be surprised if the SRA looked at it in any way other than how does the customer of the firm view this, and the customer's relationship is with the law firm, not necessarily with the technology provider. Although, I mean, consider this, when we talked in week 3 or 4, whenever it was, about National Grid and them having their own platform, if the law firms are then feeding into that and something goes wrong and that platform is providing an element of AI, then where does that leave the firm if they're advising on somebody else's AI? I suspect that if you're using the firm's AI, then it's the responsibility of the firm. But it does just open up a lot of question marks.
It does. And I think the key thing is that I kind of feel that, especially in the legal technology area, that AI is becoming a very misused term. Anything that is automated for someone is being classed as an AI solution, and the overuse of the term is it's maybe not incorrect for what these things are doing, but I think it's leading to a confusion in the industry, that you think it's you think a technology is doing something more than it actually is.
Yeah.
Because it's got this AI term.
Do we need a new tagline then? So Panache Software is an Excel on steroids platform.
We could do, yeah. That could be an extra term
saying
for it.
it.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know whether that would get us any more traction or not, but yeah, we'll see. We'll run it past the marketing team and see how they feel about that one. Yeah,
I think I know.
But yeah, okay. So well, should we go to our second item on the list?
Yeah, let's go for it.
And this was from an article in Lexology, and this was 9 technology procurement tips for corporate legal teams. And we picked this one out because this is a key thing for people now. There's so much legal technology coming onto the market, so many different things.
Yeah.
How do you actually go about choosing what you want to use and how that's going to be implemented in your organization?
Yeah.
A lot of companies, especially fintech companies or those in the financial industry, have gone through big processes of implementing big new software solutions, and I assume in the legal industry that is the same, but it seems to be a newer aspect, or things are changing very quickly for what you're used to. So Lexology had an interesting article on sort of 9 things that you should be looking at, and tips, and we wanted to just pull out a couple of the key ones that we saw on here. And
did you want to run through the 9 and then we'll pull out the relevant ones?
So the 9 tips were: number 1 was to pinpoint the problems to be solved. Number 2, check your current tech. Number 3, look for broad appeal. Number 4, find a solution that aligns with your requirements. Number 5, focus on cloud-based solutions. Number 6, prioritize integration. Number 7, calculate your return on investment. Number 8, work closely with your IT team. And finally, number 9 was educate stakeholders. So I don't know if you want to, one of the things we wanted to pick out was the first thing about pinpointing the problems to be solved. I mean, that seems a good place to start.
Well, it does, and I think the first thing that jumped out to me from that was that if you're pinpointing the problems to be solved, it implies to me that you're looking at the problems that you currently have, and by virtue of that, you're looking at the systems that you currently have and the way in which you currently work. It isn't necessarily saying, this is how we do things now, but there isn't a need for us to carry on doing that in the same way. And it surprised me that, and this is item number 1, when you could really be saying, well, actually, first of all, we might not need to do any technological stuff. We might just be able to iterate on what we already have. But if we're going to redesign the way that we work, is there a better way altogether? And if you're doing that and looking at a new way of working, it's really a different exercise to then just saying, well, what are the problems we've got and solving them? Because really, if you're solving problems, you're potentially, like we've discussed before, adding individual solutions here and there to small problems. Yeah. And you're not necessarily making a big impact. You may well be adding to the password fatigue that everybody seems to have from too many things, and ultimately just encouraging a low adoption rate for a number of small solutions. I feel personally that item number 1 perhaps ought to be, is it necessary for us to keep delivering the work as we currently are, or could we deliver it in a different way and take advantage of some of the new stuff? Yeah. So we could look at a couple of examples of problems. Yeah. Number 1, let's say, for example, email response time, right? Nobody can respond fast enough to emails because there are too many emails coming in. Yeah. So we now see solutions that come in and manage your inbox for you, and that might send automatic responses and things like that. But actually, normally, in my experience, the emails that you're getting are a dialogue, for which the phone is often a better solution than an email, although email records it better, I suspect. But actually, often it's just asking for an update on where you are on things. And you could eliminate that whole chain of emails, the incoming inquiry and the outgoing response, by just allowing your clients to see where you're up to.
Yeah, so if you had a solution that allowed people to do some sort of self-service on their issues and stuff, you're eliminating that issue with the email chains and the calls.
Exactly. So, if you pinpoint the problem and try and solve it by saying, okay, we have to respond faster to email, then you end up with an email solution, and that fine. That's fine, but it might not necessarily be the best solution.
Yeah, and I think one of the ones you were talking about previously was time recording as well. I think is a big item, isn't it? As to do you need time recording solutions, or should you be, as the industry is changing and stuff, should you actually be looking? Do you need to record time in the same way you always have done? Has things changed? I don't know if you can.
I think they've changed enough, certainly, to challenge the assumption that you need to record time. So, I mean, one of the big problems I think that people had was that they couldn't record time on the go. Well, now, all the time recording solutions have got mobile options. And that's great, but it's still an admin job that I've got to do, and it's not legally, I don't have to be a lawyer to be able to record time. Yeah. So it's not really driving me at what I'm skilled to do. So it's a distraction. A lot of people don't record time properly, and they don't close it fast enough. And there are issues around that. So that's management time, chasing up current figures and whatnot. Now, time, to me, is an essential part of it, because that is ultimately determining how fast you are going through a job, and it's indicative of how efficient you are on the job. But is there a better way of actually recording the time? Yeah. Well, if you have a platform, for example, that we've talked about, which just records how long you are in a file or whatever, and it just records that for you automatically and puts that on the file, then the system can do all of that for you, and you can just eliminate all of that time that you would otherwise spend trying to record it. Or if you are getting interrupted all day long, and you accidentally leave your screen on the wrong file, okay, the system would record more time to the wrong file, perhaps. But if you're looking at the way you're billing your clients and saying, I'm not going to bill you on a time basis anymore because you aren't going to pay for me to just incur time on your file. You want justification, and rightly so, of the work that I'm doing and the value that I'm adding. Well, that's all set out in the scope and assumptions at the beginning. And so really, as far as I'm concerned, the clients want fixed fees or contingency-based fees. They're not interested in time-based bills anymore. It's useful only as a measure of how long it takes you to do a job, and there are much better ways of recording the time that it takes than to manually go through and allocate it against a file.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting topic, isn't it? That what you're saying is that actually as clients and customers are looking more to have fixed price solutions, really the time recording becomes that you would have historically done as a lawyer and billed based on the time. That's more an internal thing now of people knowing what you were working on and stuff. It's not something that is actually needed for that final bit of billing. So looking for a time recording solution in that instance is maybe unnecessary, when actually what you're looking for is to change. Maybe this group of lawyers now move away from time recording because they're now going to be moved to fixed price work. Yep. So we need to readjust the business to accommodate that and look at how we make other changes. So it's not just, I've got this problem, I need to hit that with a hammer. It's actually saying, well, how is the business changing? Yeah. And is there other things that I can do to change and that will have knock-ons that just a simple software solution isn't going to solve. Yeah. So where they're saying that, you should be just looking at the issues and not, they said one surefire strategy is to start by focusing on simple problems rather than the big, hairy, audacious ones. Actually, maybe that's not actually that useful. Maybe you should be looking at the bigger picture in some circumstances rather than lots of little issues.
Well, I think so, but I mean, why would anyone take my word for it? But take the word for someone like Jim Collins, right, who wrote Good to Great and had several other books and has studied loads of very successful companies, and that phrase, big, hairy and audacious, is suspiciously close to big, hairy, audacious goals, or BHAGs as Jim Collins calls them. His view, supported by teams and teams of research, is researchers, and it's backed up quite a lot, is that you should be looking at BHAGs or big, hairy, audacious goals, and you should be going after those and implementing them. That's the difference between being just a good and a great company, as his book would suggest. So it feels the wrong way around to me, that one.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what we said before. a lot of, especially in the startup industry as well, and how, startups are funded and their speed to market and things also comes with, you find your, the minimum product that you have to produce. You find that one problem and you fix that one problem and you go out to market with that. And what it leads to, and in this situation, you're saying we've got this problem in-house. What solution can we have to that problem? And you're very narrowly focused on those lots of little problems and solving each little problem, when actually it might be more useful to look at a bigger problem and actually say, okay, instead of just looking at all these lots of little issues, let's have a bigger look at what's going on.
Yeah, I think so. And small goals and small and quick wins are one thing, but it's a short-term approach to a bigger picture, I think. And although it's easy for us to sit here and say, no, go after the big goals and think bigger and whatnot, I don't think you can get away from the fact that the really successful organizations do that. They may also still bring out small iterations, but not necessarily at the cost of looking at revolutionizing the way things are done. I would disagree with point one myself personally. Although there's plenty of other good stuff.
I mean, there's lots of other items in. Let's have a look at a couple of the other bits and pieces in here, and I think there's a couple that are interesting here that relate to working closely with your IT team, focusing on cloud-based solutions and prioritizing integration. These are all sort of those 3 points are sometimes quite difficult to achieve. I've worked in organizations where an area of the organization is trying to implement a new software solution, but outside of that, the IT team themselves are making sort of infrastructure policy decisions, which then go against the software that someone's trying to implement. And that can very well be clearly seen in cloud-based solutions and stuff. The cloud-based solutions are, realistically what you should be looking at now. They remove the overheads of IT infrastructure from your organization. They provide easier access, and the subscription-based model can mean that things are cheaper. However, if your IT infrastructure team is making a decision that they will not allow things to be hosted externally, then that can immediately put an end to those kind of solutions. So it is crucial to work with the IT team and make sure that the decisions that IT are making are also based on the needs of the business. Quite often these decisions can be made of, from our point of view as IT, we manage these things and this is what we think the business should be doing. Whereas the business are coming back and saying, well, we need such and such to happen. We need these other solutions. And you end up with an argument in the middle. You need these areas to be working much more closely together and saying, okay, we understand from the infrastructure point of view the good and the bad side of these things, but we also have to look at how things are changing in the industry and what solutions people are needing.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, you're saying about internal conflicts potentially, but also there are external ones, aren't there? Maybe with customers and suppliers. So this, I think, when I first read the article, I was thinking it was talking about a corporate team within a private practice firm, but actually it's talking about corporate in-house organizations. And we mentioned it again, the idea of the national grid having their own database where everybody else reports into that. Looking down this list, you're talking really about integration and how you work with. If you are in private practice, you need to be considering how your customers are going to interact with your solutions and whatnot as well, and whether or not it's okay for their information to be hosted in the cloud. Well, you can't make that decision unilaterally. You'll have to have dialogue about that.
And the point you make on integration as well is a valid one in that it says here to prioritize integration. What you often find in these situations is the solution which has the most flexibility is always the one that has to accommodate everyone else. There's a lot of many of the solutions now are designed with API interfaces and things like that. But even there, those interfaces are often very rigid. And what you'll find is they will happily integrate with other solutions as long as it's done in this exact way. And as soon as you move away from that, it becomes difficult. So that is a key area that you need to look at, in that, okay, I know that I'm going to have to integrate these solutions. Actually, how easy is that going to be? Am I going to need another solution to act as a middleware to that integration? That's quite often the case. So you end up with a solution whereby, okay, we've got our current, so say a time recording solution. You might have a time recording and a billing solution separate. You've bought both solutions now. They don't integrate properly, so you're having to buy another middleware solution to integrate those together. So yes, I would say prioritize integration, but not on the fact of, do these systems have integration, but actually how does that integration going to work? And are you going to need something else? So yeah, I think it's well worth going through and having a read of these points, and there's a lot of really interesting information in there, but look outside the box on some of these kind of things as well. And I think we said last time as well, ask the difficult questions of some of these providers as well as to how they deal with these situations.
I think so. I guess part of the value of some organizations is how well they are integrated with others. And we know, having spoken to a few other founders out there that have they were startups, and I guess you now call them enterprises because they're doing well, how they really struggle with some legacy technology providers to integrate with them. And it takes a long time, but obviously the more that's done, the more valuable they become and the easier they are to integrate and use. But yeah, that's not an easy question to be asked as a startup, is it? What are you integrating with? Because the answer is inevitably nothing. Because
you're just starting out.
You've got to get started somewhere. So you need a partner to begin with. But the question, as far as the law firms and the users are concerned, is yes, what are you integrating with? I guess, and how well.
Yeah.
Should we go on to item 3 then?
Yeah.
So this is another article from Legal IT Insider. This is PwC unveils first cohort of scale-ups in LawTech program. We'll put a link to the article in the notes afterwards. And I picked this article out because I thought it was particularly interesting. So I can't remember which episode it was now, but we started off talking about EY and their acquisition from Thomson Reuters of a legal managed service. Then a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Deloitte and their collaboration with UiPath,
I think,
and how they've got a tech, what do they call it, an innovation hub or something like they call it.
And this was all related to their managed legal services and stuff, wasn't it? And pushing those out to people.
Exactly. And now here we have PwC, 3. This is the third out of the 4 big 4 accountancy firms, which we're talking about. And, they're doing something new, which is creeping into the legal space. Now, technology for them is not new, but legal technology is newish for them. The article says this is their first round of cohorts for their LawTech program. So I'll just read the list of people that they have in it, and the one line or so that it says about what they do, and then we'll explore this in a bit more detail. So first one, Audit XPRT, an AI solution for regulatory compliance, which is Know Your Client, KYC, and AML, anti-money laundering and audit. Cap Novum, cognitive compliance management for institutions impacted by regulations. Cognitive Plus, using AI to get legal insights from contracts, understanding your legal obligations. Contract Mill, easy to implement, powerful SaaS solution for document automation. Lexical Labs, intelligent contract review. LexSnap, AI-powered legal Q&A platform. The Dockyard, end-to-end deal management platform to manage the life cycle of corporate or commercial transactions. And then Scrive, premium e-sign solutions for any business to modernize workflows across all channels. What jumps out to me from that is we have AI being referenced several more times.
Yep.
We have document automation in there. We've got deal management. There's absolutely nothing new in any of this. There are loads of these people out doing these things. They must have, some thoughts on the fact that they can do it better. And we've said that before. Why would you be put off by there being other people out doing AI solutions for reviewing of contracts, for example? I've got a better way of doing it, and then here's a whole load of people that must genuinely think that. But also reinforcing that idea, here's PwC with their own LawTech program. We've mentioned many times before about Mishcon de Reya, Alan and Overy, and all the others. They've all got their own LawTech incubation accelerator groups. And here's another one.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing to take away from here. We talked previously about these big accountancy firms and other organisations encroaching on your standard legal firms and stuff by offering these legal services and managed services out there to people. And here you go, like you say, Mishcon de Reya and stuff had their own LegalTech incubators and things like that. But here's now these accountancy firms with their own LegalTech incubators running their own legal managed services and stuff. Again, they have a lot of money to throw around, these big organisations, and it looks more and more like them eroding away at the services that your typical firms offer. I imagine specifically in the sort of the high volume managed area of legal services, where you kind of get the sense that the traditional firms may well struggle to compete in these areas now. If you've got these other organisations who are bringing in things like document automation platforms and deal management platforms and things like that, they're offering the full kind of end-to-end services at that point.
They have just so much more in terms of professional service that they can offer. Imagine, if you will, if you are let's say you're a smallish startup company, doesn't matter what it is, you need legal advice potentially for your incorporation, although some accountancy firms can, and I'm sure do that. You need accountancy advice, but it's more likely, I would think, that you need accounts and financial advice than you need legal advice. Or at least you certainly hope so, because if you need legal advice, usually it assumes you're either in trouble or you might be entering into a deal with someone, but and need a contract. But generally speaking, I think people tend to go first to the accountancy firms. So I think they're at a distinct advantage. And I don't see, I might be wrong, but I don't see any law firms offering accountancy services. I don't see law firms offering HR services or similar or IT outsourcing services, and these guys are doing that. So they've got a much wider or much bigger net, and they're casting their nets much further. And I think they will ultimately end up scraping in quite a lot of the traditional work that the law firms have got. And
you would imagine that what will be left for those law firms are the more the specialist sort of legal inquiries and legal matters that need to be dealt with, but all of the volume stuff, all of the much simpler stuff, is going to be hoovered up by these big firms, and can some of our bigger Magic Circle firms cope with just doing those those big bits of work here and there? I'm not sure they're geared up for that. Especially when they're being eroded away by people wanting fixed price work and stuff as well, and much smaller margins on these things. It does give you the sense that it's, especially in this area, it's going to be difficult to compete.
I think it will. I think it'll be very difficult. So we'll have to watch this space.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows the changing landscape now of the market, which all industries go through.
Of course.
But it is interesting to see that these organisations are building up, not necessarily that they're building up these incubators. We expect them to be doing that kind of stuff. They've done that in the fintech area and stuff before, but it's that they're specifically creating LawTech incubators and encroaching on that space. But on the other side of things, it's another avenue for the startups and things to look at. It opens up the market much more than as we've said before, rather than having to thinking that your market is the specific law firms out there. Actually, you can now market towards these big accountancy firms as well. It's a whole new avenue.
I think so. And not just London or not just New York. I mean, I think these accountancy firms have got offices everywhere, and I don't remember where all of the legal work is being done for all of them, but it isn't just focused in the capitals. It's out in the regions as well. So
so maybe not such great news for the big law firms, maybe good news for the legal startups.
I think so. So we've covered EY, Deloitte, PwC. That leaves us, we must have to find an article now on KPMG. They must be doing something.
Must be something. We'll scour that for next week, shall we? And
all KPMG listeners, get in touch and let us know
definitely
what you're doing.
Well, should we kind of go go to the end and go to some events that we found that are coming up in the future?
A couple of events for you. Number one, Legal Innovators. This is the 11th of October. It's an all-day event at the ETC venues at St. Paul's. That's 200 Aldersgate in London. We'll put a note again, a link to it in the notes at the end of the show. I had a look down the list of attendees, and I summarised it in our notes here as everyone. I didn't see too many names that you would want to meet as a startup, or if you're a law firm that you wouldn't want to see as your technology company's going that weren't on the list. So I summarise it by saying everyone's going. The questions that I've picked off the page for you to consider: how do you build and run an effective innovation team? How do you get value out of an AI system?
There's that AI term again.
I should rephrase that. How do you get value out of an Excel on steroids system?
Solution? Yep.
I suppose you should be able to substitute Excel for Word as well, though. Personally, I think.
I think so. I think Excel though is the king of all applications.
It is. How do we use automation to improve workflows and harness legal data? What are the opportunities for legal ops? And what problems do clients really want to solve with technology? The last point is the key one as far as I'm concerned. What do your customers really want? Well, again, it's focusing on problems, but it's client facing rather than internally facing. Anyway, so lots of that. That's Legal Innovators, 11th of October.
Yep.
More recent or more closely in the future, the item number 2, the future of cybersecurity. Now, I've put this in because this is a meetup rather than a conference. Now, it happens to be part of the Silicon Roundabout meetup group, of which I think there are 14,000 members, so it's not a small one. But I like the meetup idea because conferences don't necessarily come cheap. Some of them you can get free tickets for, but usually you're talking in the hundreds of pounds to attend. This one is a £5 plus 92p booking fee if you're going as an individual. There are various different tiers of cost, but £5 seems all right.
And that's what we're saying, to attend one of these conferences is normally expensive. To exhibit at a conference is normally expensive, especially for startups and the like.
Thousands.
So these, I think these kind of meetups are a really nice place to do network. Well, as it says on then, starts with networking and drinks and things like that. It's a great place to meet people.
Seed and Series A startups presentations. So that's interesting for both. I think both the law firms and the tech companies, because if you're a tech company, you can get to see how it's done. You might even get to chat to some investors if there are some there. If you're a law firm, then you might get to hear about some new innovative, wonderful solution in cybersecurity, which I think is, we've said many times, is particularly relevant.
And it's a huge thing at the moment, the cybersecurity aspect. So
exactly. Then there's an expert panel discussion, and then finally some more networking afterwards. That is the 26th of June. It's 6:30 p.m. till 8:30 p.m. So it's 2 hours at the Google campus, 4 to 5 Bonhill Street. That's London as well. So, future of cybersecurity sounds interesting. And on the theme of meetups and whatnot, we're mulling over the idea of having one of our own, because most of these events, conferences, etc., are all in London. And I don't know about you, when we look at the statistics of who's looking, there are a lot of people in London watching, but there are a lot of people outside of London watching too, and there are a lot of people outside of London working in the legal sphere and in the tech sphere. So we need to think about relocating some of that tremendous resource and networking out to the sticks.
I think so. So we've been contemplating something we may look on and touch on later as to whether we can do some sort of legal tech meetups and stuff outside in in other smaller not smaller areas. I mean, I guess our city, Birmingham, Bristol, Bath, all those places. They're not exactly small, but
little villages.
They're not necessarily where these events take place, but they are where a lot of actual there's so many lawyers and legal firms outside of the city. There's so many software organizations outside of the city and things like that we might look into seeing if we can get something together.
I mean, to have a meetup page isn't free, sadly. Be nice if it was, but they got to make some money. To actually host the thing isn't free. To provide the food and drink isn't free, of course. So hence why we need associate members and above to sign up. And or if there are people out there interested in getting involved in something like that, and maybe you've got a bit of spare office space that we could poach, we're not beyond sticking our hand out and asking.
And it's time and again we kind of look at these things. It's trying to build a community and trying to open up the dialogue between things. I mean, we see a lot about new startups going into these new cohorts and things like that as people are making all these incubators and things like that, but often you wonder, what are these people actually doing? What is with the questions from earlier about AI solutions, what actually are some of these solutions? And a lot of what we're doing is to try and or we want to push for more openness in these things and open up the dialogue between people and get the information out there.
Absolutely.
Keep posted for that, and we'll put the feelers out to see if there's any interest on doing some of those meetups.
Definitely
as well.
So I think that we'll wrap up there. Anyone wants to get in touch, the best way to do so is to go on to the Patreon page, or if you want to email us, it's panachecast@panachesoftware.com. Obviously, as we've said before, we prioritize any reader mail that we get through Patreon, so submit it that way if you can. That's better. But otherwise, I think we'll conclude there, and watch out for our next episode.
See
you again soon.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.